Hello, this is Mr. White. I just went through the Alfred M speech and annotated and outlined a rhetorical analysis essay response, but it didn't record. So I'm just going to go through real quick and sort of point out what I did. If you've read the speech, you have the speech in front of you, and I'll link it in the comments for the YouTube page. Go ahead and go through it, and then you can kind of pause and go back and forth as you need to if you want to figure out how I addressed it in more detail. But I'm just going to kind of go through real quick. So as I'm reading, the first thing I notice, Alfred M. Green, it doesn't give any information about him whatsoever. Um, Later on, and I circled it to let me know, hey, who is this guy? To know I'd be looking out for it. I did find out he's African American. That helps. Deals with credibility, right? Um, And I think that was all it revealed, really, about, I'd say he's an activist, just in context of giving a speech. Um, but again, this part is important. This is where they give you a rhetorical situation and fill you in on what's going on. When you go to write your essay, you're going to have to write a rhetorical situation that includes this information, the most important stuff from it, and also your a little bit about the rhetoric, and most of that will come into the thesis. But this is half of your introduction, in a sense. So always read this, read it carefully. You're going to end up kind of regurgitating a lot of it in your own essay. This is a simple rhetorical analysis prompt. It just says analyze methods that Green uses to persuade his fellow Americans. So nothing more specific than that. How does he use language to persuade people? This is sort of the generic rhetorical analysis. So what I did next, I went through and read this section here. It's a lot of positive language. He's obviously trying to invoke a sense of patriotism. So I kind of blocked out, where you can see it here, kind of blocked out this paragraph, wrote patriotism on the side. I put little plus marks as I was reading to show that he's using these positive words, these glittering generalities. He's got a metaphor here, in whose heart burns the love of country, of freedom, and of civil and religious toleration. Some nice parallel structure there. Uh, let's see, a little epistrophe. All these little style things I point out, most of them I won't end up doing anything with, like the metaphor. Some of them I might, but mainly I'm focusing on structure. Big things he's doing with the planning of his essay. What are his big building blocks? How did he plan it out? How did he structure it? So some of this vocabulary helps. Prescribed means to be mistreated. So he's kind of alluding to counter argument here, which is cool. Useful to know. If you happen to miss that, it's okay, because this whole next section is him addressing grievances that people would have. Here he's trying to say, hey, we should be patriotic. Some people aren't going to accept that. They're going to say, wait a minute, I was enslaved by this nation. Why do I want to fight for it? So here he's saying, yes, we were mistreated. He's acknowledging that. So this is counter argument. Uh, some anaphora here. It is true. It is true. Um, the result of the most unfair rules of judicial investigation has been the pay we have received for our solicitude, sympathy, and aid in the dangers and difficulties of those days that tried men's souls. Nice euphemism here for slavery. But what he's saying here is that, yeah, I acknowledge it. We were mistreated. Um, but he's also saying that because these people but our forefathers were great men, they had great ideas about equality, they set things in motion to give all men equality. He acknowledges that that hasn't come to fruition. He acknowledges that they didn't quite finish what they set out to do. Um, and he's implying here that we shouldn't let it go, that we're close, that we can still have that nation, those equalities, that freedom. Just don't give up, because they're still worth fighting for. So again, we have patriotism. Then he shifts over to this counter argument to ensure that he gets people feeling patriotic, even if they've been mistreated. And then once he gets everyone on board, then he can move into, okay, this is our duty. Here's what we need to do. So that's sort of the call to action, this whole section on duty. Again, more metaphor. Vocabulary helps. Emoluments like a payment. Let not the honor and glory achieved by our fathers be blasted or sullied by a want of true heroism among their sons. Don't be a coward. It's your duty to go in and fight for what we believe in. Don't waste their sacrifice, is another way of saying it. Let us then take up the sword. I like this because even though there were swords in the Civil War, it was still sort of a romanticized weapon. It wasn't the primary weapon that people used. It was definitely the rifle. So here it's kind of alluding to those classic honorable battles back to everything from Greek mythology up to the Revolutionary War, where swords were more prominent. It's a more romantic notion. Let us then take up the sword, trusting in God. So here we have our religious illusion, who will defend the right, remembering that these are other days than those of yore. So here basically equating the fact that we're doing the right thing, meaning that God will be on our side. This is sort of an old trope. Bob Dylan wrote a song about it, how every army thinks that they're doing the right thing and that God is with them, but that can't be true for everybody, right? Not everybody can be doing the right thing. But he's using that argument that we're doing the right thing, God is going to be with us, how could we lose with God? So that, again, kind of an emotional appeal to those who are religious. And then here, that the war cry of the howling leaders of secession and treason is, this is the same thing that Abigail Adams did. He is addressing these ideas of secession and treason that the enemy, the Confederacy, is fighting for, and he's turning these ideas into sort of giant personified villains or creatures on the battlefield that are howling their war cry. You can almost picture the imagery it creates. It's like almost a propaganda poster, like when they would make the Nazis. One of the famous propaganda posters had the Nazi regime allegorized as King Kong and all of the good troops fighting King Kong. So same type of thing here. It's creating that imagery, if that might come into play. I put alludes to Christianity, morality, the allegory I pointed out. And then I also said there's some anaphora here. He, again, let us then take, he does that a few times. And it just gives rhythm and power to it. Let us have. All right, the very last part, I guess his conclusion, he does throw a new little thing in there. He wants to give people something to think about on their way out. He's been talking about big ideas of freedom and independence. And then the end here, he's going to shift over and he's going to give a practical reason why we should fight. And it's because there are still Southern slaves that are living in this tyranny. Almost maybe he's trying to elicit guilt from his audience because he's addressing free men when not everybody is free. And for you to turn your back and walk away on the nation is also turning your back and walking away from your brothers who are still fighting or still slaves, and some of them being forced to fight for the South. So he says, your very presence among the troops of the North would inspire your oppressed brethren of the South with zeal for the overthrow of the tyrant system and confidence in the armies of the living God, the God of truth, justice, and equality to all men. So he ties it back to God and morality and that, hey, this is the right thing to do. Okay, that is essentially reading through, annotating, and I'm always looking for structure. I'm looking for those big building blocks, and I think I found them. This is patriotism. This addresses a counter-argument, which is necessary in order for former slaves to feel patriotic toward America. And then once that's done, he can then move on to duty. Those are my sections. How am I going to break that into buckets? I don't really want to have 3 buckets. It's a time to write. I'd like to have 2 buckets. I need to talk about them in order since this thing leads to this thing, which allows for this thing. That's what they refer to in the rubrics and all when they talk about the line of reasoning, how these pieces work together. And that's fine, but I'm still left with essentially 3 buckets. So what I do is I look at it real quick and I say, he's trying to invoke patriotism. Here's my bad handwriting for you. He's trying to invoke patriotism here. A lot of people aren't going to go along with this. So he realizes that, and then he starts acknowledging their grievances and addressing the counter argument. So essentially, I've drawn a box around this because those are the 2 ideas that can be talked about in the same bucket. So remember an analytical paragraph, I'm going to make a claim, embed a quote, I'm going to explain it, I'm going to explain the effect on the reader. As I'm explaining the effect on the reader, I'm going to acknowledge that not the effect on some of the readers is they're just going to say, forget this. I was enslaved. I'm not fighting for these people. And that's when I'm going to talk about the counter argument. He spends a lot of time on it. It's definitely a major structural thing. I'm going to put that in because it's necessary in order for him to get on to the duty part. But I'm going to combine these 2 into 1 bucket. And then my second bucket is going to be duty. So bucket 1, bucket 2. All right, so for patriotism, I need to write about it. What can I say about it? I need some techniques, sure. So the things we came up with when we went through it were background information, structural technique. He talks about the founding of the nation and the principles. And then he also uses strong diction, patriotic diction. Okay. What I don't want to do in the essay, I don't want to say he uses background information and diction. I don't even want to use terms that are on the 5 canons or in the style guide if I don't have to. What I want to do is I want to rephrase these into my own language, a more conversational language, and avoid just dropping these terms because they're convenient. The reason we do this is because people know this because they've studied the same stuff you've studied. When you say diction, they know what you're talking about. The problem is because it gives you that confidence that you'll be understood, you end up not explaining enough. If you were to call things what you just describe what the author is doing in your own words, you'd be a little bit insecure in that you're going to be asking yourself, hey, are they understanding what I mean when I say this? And what you'll end up doing is because you want to make sure that it's understood, you'll actually do a better job of describing it and explaining it. And that's what they want to see on the AP exam. They want that detail. So instead of saying he uses background information, I say by invoking the American principles, by invoking American principles or the principles of the founding fathers or the American Revolution and the ideas that spurred it. I could say it in all kind of ways, but I'm going to do that instead of using background information, okay? And instead of saying uses diction, which you don't ever want to say because all authors use diction. Diction just means words, choice of words. I'm going to say, and using patriotic terms. So just be more conversational with it, explain what he's doing. Using patriotic terms, he bolsters the pride of his audience. So it makes them feel proud of being Americans. And then I'm going to go into this. Many are going to argue against it, saying, we have grievances, we were slaves, we don't care about the nation. And that's why he goes into that whole next thing. So all that's going to be a bucket. Bucket number 2 is on duty. What does he do? He alludes to religion to make a moral argument. And he also has a call to arms where he's saying it's every man's duty to fight for what he believes in. And he creates some strong imagery. So I will get some style elements in my essay, but they're going to fall under structural things. I've already discussed that whole last section of his essay is invoking a sense of duty in people. So I've already kind of mentioned the structural elements of it, And then how does he do that? Well, that's where the style comes in. So I will have discussion. I will get into the imagery. I might talk about the allegory. I'll definitely talk about the religious illusion by referring to God and morality. You know, I'm going to say that instead of he uses religious illusion. What you want to do, think of it this way, uses illusion. And even if you want to get a little bit more specific and say religious, this is still a noun. Okay, religious illusion is a thing. It's better for you to say, use allude instead of illusion, the noun form, use the verb form. He alludes to Christianity. And the morality of American ideology. Something along those lines, but instead of using illusion, the noun, at least shift it into the verb. That's going to give you a much more conversational, descriptive essay. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to do, other than I'll mention one more thing. Conclusion. Imagine that the person has read your essay and they agree with you. Yes, Green does do these things in this order for this effect. Okay. And then they look at you and they say, so what? Sometimes you hear teachers say, answer the so what question. This is a good way to do a conclusion. What you don't want to do is repeat things you've already said. So don't put your thesis back in here. Nobody has forgotten what your thesis is. Expand on your thesis now. So they look at you, they say, I agree with you, but who cares? So now you need to talk about the significance of rhetoric in this context. So why did his use of rhetoric matter? One thing is he's trying to get African Americans to join the Union to fight in the Civil War. Did African Americans, at the time he wrote it, they weren't allowed to join yet, but were they eventually allowed to join? Did we have African American soldiers in the Civil War fighting for the North? Yes, we did. We're not going to say it's directly because of Green's speech and his fabulous rhetoric that the North won the war and that we are still a United States of America today, but we can certainly imply that this type of rhetoric and the need, you can admire his strategy, especially I think the counter argument. It's a tough sell to get African Americans to fight for a nation that hasn't treated them well. Some of them had just received their freedom recently. They weren't. A lot of them had to escape. A lot of them have lost loved ones. So what I try to do when I write is definitely use what you know about the subject in your introduction and conclusion as much as you can. And then you want to end your essay with energy. You want to put style into your own writing, so the energy level should be going up in your conclusion. So think about what's significant. Think about what's emotional. Think about what might, make your audience's heart pitter patter a little bit as they're reading your words. So talk about these things. You're in a place where you know a lot more than Green knew, because in hindsight, you know how the war turned out. You know what great things followed from that. And you could always go the other way and talk about, it would have been terrible had the North not had that extra help and won the war. But you don't want to be negative in your conclusion. You want to be positive. So go the other way with it. Talk about, how this sort of rhetoric probably did encourage people to overcome their personal grievances and step up and fight for their nation, which, resulted in the country we have today. So conclusion, you want to expand on the thesis. Ignore that. And you want to answer the so what question. Okay, and then the other one is definitely raise the energy level of your essay. If you repeat yourself in your conclusion, it's going to lower the energy, raise the energy level of your essay. Okay, that's it for now. No promises on this one because I've already made a few promises for other essays. And we only have so much time. I might, if I get a chance, I'll go and I'll actually write up this essay for you and post it so you can kind of get a feel for it. And that would be another video. If I do that, I'll link it to this one. All right, thank you. And send me any questions or comments. I think if you leave comments on the YouTube page, they won't show up immediately, just so I can make sure it's not, just crazy trolls yelling. But you can definitely send me comments and they'll show up eventually. All right, take care and goodbye.